My next patron question is from Aiden, who wants to know if there's a connection between two specific years in film history. Two years that I find very intriguing to look back on are 1989 and 2000. These years were both distinctive and were filled with many major films. They also represent the year before and the year after a decade. How comparable and or different do you feel both years' cinematic outputs were to each other? You know, I've not thought much about whether certain years in movies are comparable, but let's take a look at these. Of course, a major thing these years have in common is Hollywood's love for big, crowd-pleasing blockbusters. The summer of 1989 was an especially notable time for this, with Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Ghostbusters 2 being among the big movies that opened during the summer months. The likes of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Dead Poets Society, Uncle Buck, Parenthood, Do the Right Thing, When Harry Met Sally, and Turner and Hooch also made an impact. Although you also had films studios had certain expectations for that were not met. Star Trek V: The Final Frontier is considered a low point of the franchise, with both critical and fan response and box office underwhelming. Orion Pictures also thought they had the next big comedy hit with UHF, but that did not happen. At least that movie was able to eventually gain a significant cult following. License to Kill is, adjusted for inflation, the lowest grossing James Bond movie, although while it did poorly in North America, the international numbers were enough to help it turn a profit. Contrary to popular belief, corporate issues relating to MGM had to do with Timothy Dalton not getting to make a third Bond movie rather than the box office of License to Kill. Later in the year, movies that made an impression on viewers and performed well at the box office included Look Who's Talking, The Little Mermaid, Back to the Future Part 2, War of the Roses, Born the 4th of July, and the eventual Best Picture winner, Driving Miss Daisy. The independent film scene was also starting to leave an impact with some of the movies released in 1989, showing there was an audience for these smaller films. Steven Soderbergh made his feature directing debut with Sex, Lies, and Videotape, and Michael Moore also came out with his first documentary, Roger and Me. As you can see, there was this eclectic mix of films that appealed to all sorts of tastes, and a pretty terrific year for movies. My own top 5 are Crimes and Misdemeanors, The Little Mermaid, When Harry Met Sally, Batman, and Field of Dreams, with honorable mentions to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Do the Right Thing. As for 2000, that year also had Hollywood bring out some major blockbusters with audiences having an appetite for big spectacles. Mission Impossible 2 was after all the highest grossing movie of the year, with people wanting to see Tom Cruise perform these wild stunts. Although the movie that year that has probably stayed the most with people is Gladiator. It's fascinating this extremely violent and super serious historical drama about the Roman Empire was a big crowd pleaser, but it was, and that likely played a role in it winning Best Picture. There was also The Perfect Storm, Castaway, and X-Men enticing audiences with a use of special effects to put their characters in danger. The family film arena was also an interesting one and a major cog in the movie studio machine that had grown a lot since 1989. There were the hits like How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Dinosaur, Chicken Run, Rugrats in Paris, and My Dog Skip. And while movies like The Road to El Dorado and The Emperor's New Groove had grosses that might have seemed underwhelming, their stature has grown and they're very fondly remembered. Comedies were also kind of a big deal that year, with the likes of Meet the Parents, Scary Movie, What Women Want, Miss Congeniality, and Big Mama's House doing really well at the box office. I mentioned Steven Soderbergh when talking about 1989, and he had grown enough of a pedigree to have Aaron Brockovich and Traffic open that year and both get into Best Picture when there were only 5 slots. The Prestige and independent film fronts were also supplying theaters with a healthy dose of films that found an audience. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon might be the most notable with its impressive crossover appeal. You also have the likes of Brother Where Art Thou, Billy Elliot, You Can Count on Me, American Psycho, Best in Show, Almost Famous, and Dance in the Dark receiving attention. Of course, there are naturally the movies largely considered misfires, including Battlefield Earth, Titan AE, The Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas, Little Nicky, and Dungeons & Dragons. In the 11 years since 1989, a lot had changed in Hollywood. Budgets had gotten bigger, although studios had also started investing more in smaller films through their specialty divisions. Some film distribution and production companies went under, with others popping up in their place. DVD was launched in the 90s and started slowly but surely replacing the VHS. The internet was also growing, including the arrival of a company named Netflix in 1997 that competed with Blockbuster in the video rental space. Entering the 21st century, there was definitely a lot of excitement what new technologies would bring, as well as uncertainty as studios continued to compete for audience attention. Overall, I do think 2000 has a really great crop of movies, with my personal top 5 this year being Billy Elliot, Almost Famous, Gladiator, Chicken Run, and The Emperor's New Groove. Also, honorable mention to Memento, which I know many consider a 2001 release, but it was released in a number of countries in 2000, so it could be considered that year too. Looking at both 1989 and 2000, it shows how some things in the film industry stayed the same, while also changing in other areas too. In the end, it's always possible to find worthwhile movies in any year you look up. Thank you for your question, Aiden.